Welcome, everybody. I am Chris Prue. I'm the co-CEO of Umentum. So glad to have you all here. We are in the process of just admitting everybody from the waiting room. So I'm just going to allow Christina a few more minutes to get everybody checked in here, and then we'll get started. So just give us another second or two, and we'll get underway. Okay, looks like I'm sure there'll be some late arrivals, but it looks like we have everybody here. Again, thank you all very much for spending the next hour with us over the course of the discussion here. This is a Umentum webinar that's part of our ongoing series to really focus on organizational transformation and the kinds of strategies, tactics, and best practices that nonprofits and NGOs can be using, especially in these challenging times when funding sources and ways of working are being disrupted across the sector. So today we're going to focus on using earned income and fee-for-service models as part of your diversified revenue mix. And we have a good set of panelists that are going to take us through that topic today. A few housekeeping notes. We are recording this meeting, or webinar, so that we can share it with those who registered but are unable to attend us with us at this appointed hour. So just so you're aware of that. Second housekeeping piece is your microphone should be muted. Should you inadvertently become unmuted, please remute yourself. Also, Christine, our webinar co-host here, will also try to keep an eye on that, just so that we minimize disruptions for everybody as we work through the webinar today. We're going to introduce a poll question here in just a minute, so we can take the pulse of the room and of the group. So we'll look forward to your active participation in that poll. And we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, but I actually really encourage, if you have questions, to use the chat and put those questions directly into the chat as we work through the webinar conversation. And I will, as moderator, make an effort to pick up some of those questions that I think are relevant based on the outline of the discussion we have today, and share those questions with our panelists so that we can consider them as we move along. So again, I think what we'll do is we'll get started. Again, I'm Chris Prue. For those of you who just joined, I'm the co-CEO of Umentum. And by virtue of my experience in both the private sector and in the nonprofit sector, I have a fair bit of experience with the kinds of models we're talking about today in different kinds of settings. So I'm going to primarily moderate the discussion today, but I look forward to jumping in with any kind of key points as I need to. And so before we go around and ask all of the panelists to introduce themselves, I would like Christine to initiate a poll. So we have a quick poll question for all of you, so we get a little bit of sense of who you are and what your background is with this. So you'll see, hopefully, the poll having popped up. And so we're just looking for a sense of, what your revenue mix looks like right now, and how much of that is from earned income sources, as opposed to grants or private donations. So let's just take a second to gather that information. I can see a bunch of you have already completed that. Terrific. So we're about half of you completed. And yeah, well, about 80% of you, it looks like, are at 0 or less than 20% of revenue in these types of sources. So that's not surprising, I think, probably to us on the panel. And we are looking forward to having a conversation, and hopefully by the end of the day today, giving you a few tangible ideas that you can take back into your own organizations, talk with your colleagues about, perhaps even talk to your boards about it, and be able to sort of get some sense of the direction you want to go. So again, yeah, it looks like 38 and 42. Yeah, so 82% at less than 20%, and then a sprinkling of people in all the other categories. So, and for those of you who are 50% or more, there's 3 of you here. Really welcome your participation in the chat as well. And these are great peer learning opportunities. So if there's some things that you're doing, do share in the chat, and we'll share those around as well. Okay, so let's go around the rest of the, here's the results. Let us go now to introduce the rest of the panel. So also from Umentum, I have with me Sheila Nemi. Sheila is one of our technical directors for global initiatives based in Nairobi, who has a range of diverse experiences related to this topic. So let Sheila introduce herself.
Thanks, Chris. As mentioned by Chris, I work as a technical director within global initiatives at Humentum, and I provide technical advice on different perspectives, from risk and compliance to governance to financial sustainability and funding. And I have roughly around 18 years of experience, both in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector. And so this gives me a very good understanding of both models and how they work and the different systems and structures that need to be there for you to actually deliver a proper earned income or a fee for service delivery. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the next 1 hour. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Welcome. Next, we have Chigundo Masoke, the former executive director of Kampala Music School and still the director of music there. So I will toss it to you for an introduction.
So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Chigundo Masoke. I'm the former executive director of Kampala Music School, a post I ran from 2012 until 2 months ago. Currently the director of music. I've been involved with the Kampala Music School in the 24 years it's been open in various guises, as a head of keyboard, also briefly a bookkeeper, and before I become the executive director, and now we've decided to split the role such that we have somebody who is more involved in the administrative running of things, while I stay and focus much more on the music things, which is both my expertise and my passion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Christine, it looks like Natasha dropped off.
She's here.
She is here. All right. Natasha Masanza is also here, Executive Director of Digital Society Africa. So welcome, Natasha, and let's hear a little intro from you.
Thank you, Chris. First of all, apologies, folks. I have a really bad connection, but I'll keep my camera on just for this moment, just so that you see you're not talking to a robot. So my name is Natasha. I am the CEO of the Digital Society of Africa. Digital Society of Africa was founded in 2015. So technically, we're celebrating a decade of existence this year. And the organization is virtual. We describe ourselves as a distributed network of digital security practitioners and technologists who support social justice and human rights defenders across 6 countries currently in Southern Africa. I will talk more about DSA as we go along. Thank you, Chris. Back to you.
Thank you, Natasha. And yeah, feel free to drop off camera to maintain bandwidth. We know you're there. And in this day and age, we do have to clarify that we're not robots, I guess. So thank you for that. So hopefully you can appreciate, we have really sort of 3 different diverse perspectives. You know, Sheila's going to really try to answer and discuss a lot of the kind of fundamental kind of nuts and bolts of these processes as we go through the conversation. And then 2 really quite different business models, as we discovered last week when we had our prep call. So Kampala Music School, very much a place-based entity in Kampala, and a lot of physical logistics and infrastructure concerns. And then, as you just heard from Natasha, Digital Society of Africa is completely virtual, completely a very flexible and agile business model. So you're going to get 2 quite different perspectives from our 2 leaders today on the kinds of business models that they're operating. But I'm going to go back to Sheila first, just so that we kind of ground ourselves in sort of the definition of what we're talking about here and the kinds of things that exist under a definition of an earned income or program service fee revenue model. So Sheila, can I have you come in here?
Yes, Chris. And I'll just do a quick definition, and as we go along, it might become clearer. So when we speak about earned income, this is income or revenue that the organization gets because it's providing a good, maybe it's selling a good or it's providing a service. It's very different from donations or grants. And when we talk about fee-for-service model, it's actually a type of earned income, whereby the income you're getting is specifically because you're delivering a service. And for example, you could actually be doing training, you could be providing consultancy, you could be selling a publication or any digital content. You could actually even be assisting another organization to do monitoring and evaluation, and they pay you for that service. So any fee income that you get that's not donation or grant, it's a good you're selling, or it's a service that you're actually providing to another organization. And you'll find that when you're pricing this particular service, it's based on your cost recovery, it's based on the market demand, what's the price out there in the market, and it's also based on the value that you're delivering to that particular organization or person out there. So that's just a very high level overview of earned income and fee-for-service model.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. And I think we'll dig into some of those things, especially overheads and fees and how that relates to the financial sustainability of your model as we go through the conversation. Sometimes, I'm just going to stay with you for 1 minute. Sometimes people also throw around the word social enterprise. And can you just say a little bit about a social enterprise in this particular context? And are we talking about the same thing, or are we talking about something different?
So a social enterprise is actually an example of an organization that has earned income, because earned income is like the overall kind of, what can I say, definition, and then you have different types. So a social enterprise is actually an organization that has earned income. So based on what it is that you're actually providing out there, so that will be what the income that you're getting from that social service that you're providing, whether it's a good you're selling or it's a particular service you're selling, then that becomes part of what you earn. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you one last question, because sometimes I hear this in conversation with leaders of nonprofits and NGOs. Sometimes when I talk about this, they raise an eyebrow and they say, but wait, can a nonprofit sell a service? And how do you think about that question?
So nonprofits can sell services. Actually, many nonprofits do sell services. The only thing we look at is you must have the proper structures to be able to do this. You must have the proper legal setup, because depending on the country where you're registered, and also making sure that also from a tax perspective, you've sorted also that out from a compliance perspective. But many nonprofits do sell services. An example being Humentum. We are a nonprofit. We work with social organizations that do social good, but also apart from managing large programs, we do actually sell services. We do have a fee for service delivery model, which I think I can go into later, or you want me to go into it now, Chris?
We'll come back to you on that so I can let others kind of chime in, but we will describe the Humentum model. And I want to be clear, I mean, Sheila has a lot of risk and compliance experience, and we'll be able to speak to the broad risk and compliance themes. But as Sheila just noted, your jurisdiction in terms of the regulations and especially the tax code compliance are obviously going to vary. And so if you are considering setting something up, it is probably worthwhile to get local advice because obviously it's quite different from country to country. And we're not going to have the bandwidth or the expertise to kind of get into those specifics today. But I think Sheila can help us with some of the broader risk and compliance questions if you have them. So let me come back now to our other panelists so that we learn a little bit about the structure and design of their organization and their business model and how much of their revenue is coming from these types of sources. So why don't I start with Natasha? Do you want to give us a brief overview of Digital Society of Africa, how you're structured, and specifically to this point, how your revenue is generated?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. So Digital Society of Africa is a nonprofit, but we operate through a hybrid earned income model that is, I believe, grounded in agility and responsiveness. We use what we call the Maricho model. It's a Shona word. It's derived from a Shona word that refers to seasonal or task-based work. This means that we can receive grant funding, However, we have clients that pay for services, especially when we give the support or offer our consulting services to private sector entities or other nonprofits that are deemed to be able to afford our services. So this kind of model basically enables us to offer support for free to less resourced nonprofits who are at risk. We also occasionally do some pro bono work for people that we care about. And at the same time, this arrangement, it enables us to have options and diversify our revenue streams and reduce dependency on traditional fundraising models. But you will find in our case that due to really high demand, especially at this point, the primary revenue source does kind of remain grants, as the groups that we support primarily have funders who want them to be resilient and will pay for it directly to us. We also make some low risk investments that earn us a little bit of income as well. So back to this Maricho model, right? We work with consultants. I did say we are in 6 countries in Southern Africa currently. So we work with consultants, and it allows us basically to scale our efforts based on available funding and whatever is the contextual needs in the space. And what that means is that when a project is funded in any country, we either deliver it through a lean core team, or we tap into our consultant network to identify individuals who have the right skills and availability at that time. So each engagement is defined by clear deliverables, timelines, and compensation without the long-term obligations of traditional employment. Even our leadership, including myself as the CEO and the co-founder, we operate on a consultancy basis. So this structure, it not only supports the diverse interests and flexibility in our team, but it also keeps our overheads really low, right? And it enables us to remain agile and in politically sensitive contexts in which we operate. I personally am based in Zimbabwe. It's one of the most volatile spaces to operate. So you can imagine, as a fully virtual and paperless organization, we minimize risks, first of all, that are associated with physical offices, such as surveillance, harassment, and seizures of equipment, among other things. At the same time, we maximize on local relevance by engaging the consultants who are familiar with the language, the culture, and the digital threat landscapes of their community. And lastly, our model, it basically challenges traditional notions of organizational structure and work, because it emphasizes outputs over hours, local expertise over, for instance, centralization, and sustainability through the end income versus dependency on just the grants. Most importantly, it ensures that we can remain mission focused and aligned and responsive at the same time to the people who need us when they need us. I think I can stop here for now. Back to you.
Yeah, great, Natasha. When Natasha and I and Sheila and I were talking last week, I realized there could be a whole other webinar on the type of model that Natasha and her team are putting together in terms of all the management practices and tools of really running these very virtual, very lightweight organizations. And I like what you said there about, really valuing output over hours. But let me just stay with a piece that make sure that I give you a little opportunity to expand on it, right? So if I understand correctly, you're delivering the same service essentially to different clients. Some of those clients are actually paying you directly for that service. Some are receiving those services pro bono because you have a third party, a funder, who's actually providing those services. So I just want to clarify for everybody, right? So that you're actually taking the same service and building a hybrid revenue model with different funding sources for that same service. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less. We do have a range of services. I think I didn't quite describe them, but the bulk of our work is undertaking digital security risk assessments and security audits. And then from that, we determine what sort of assistance any entity needs. So we might find that, okay, they just need some training, they just have rubbish passwords, or they write passwords in notebooks, or their server is just out of date and stuff like that. We do direct technical support, we do security policy formulation, and we also have a help desk that is virtual and it's 24 hours. So the service that we render to any organization depends on what we find when we do their security audit. So it differs, but it's more or less in this range of services at any point.
Great, thanks. And we're going to come back to Natasha in a bit because we're going to talk a little bit about the overhead and the cost recovery and the different types of support. And she mentioned investment, and we're going to come back to that as well. So Chigundu, let's, as a contrast, maybe describe the structure and format that you have at Kampala Music School and how you've developed a hybrid model there as well.
Thank you, Chris. So Kampala Music School opened 24 and a bit years ago, and it grew out of another organization called Pianos for Uganda, which was entirely volunteer-led by the founders. But when the music school itself opened, the main thing was having a couple of people running the admin, literally 2 people, and then a whole bunch of teachers. But as the school grew, this became clear that we needed a little bit more. So the group grew to have an accountant, a marketing person, a couple of admin assistants, office assistants, a librarian for the expanding library to look after the instruments. And then all the teachers who are in on a as needed basis. So kind of similar to what Natasha was talking about. They come in as consultants and are basically come in as needed. We've most of our, about, at the moment it's about 90% of our students will pay fees, and then about 10% are covered under bursary program. This bursary program used to be fully funded, but now we ask people to contribute something to towards their bursaries. And then the admin staff are the only people who are on a permanently based salary base, but then the teachers will get a percentage of the fees depending on, we rank them separately. We've got mentees and irregular teachers, and then also our senior teachers who are the most highly qualified. Most of our funding, we have a couple of funding partners, but we do have other events that happen and other things that we do to raise money. So like the hiring of our instruments, or when we do concerts or holiday programs, those contribute about 10 to 15% of our overall every revenue. And then the lessons themselves, the one-to-one mostly, and the group lessons that we have contribute to about 50-60% of our overall revenue. We have a Friends of Kampala Music School whose contribution has been dwindling a little bit, but used to be about 8 to 10% of our overall revenue. And then when we do have some programs, like the recently concluded Kampala City, Kampala Youth Orchestra, we've had sometimes done partnerships. This one was with the city of Strasbourg and the city of Kampala, where both city councils came together to run many programs, one of which was a youth orchestra where we had about 80 students covered. And we've had several other programs before, where we've had a brass band, which was being covered by one of our mobile companies, MTN. And then also another UK-based charity, Music Quality, was also covering a school with people learning. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how we've operated, for the past 24 years.
Yeah, what I really appreciated about your model, Chigundu, is the diversity of different sources of funding, that you've got essentially fees, the direct fee for service, as Sheila was saying, which is really the lessons component. You're then running events for the public and generating revenue off of that. You've got some corporate relationships and then therefore getting sponsorship or support from corporate. Then you've got these international relationships, the UK and the city of Strasbourg, et cetera, where you're bringing in other dollars to be able to help fund programs, obviously it's not 100% fee for service, but you really have kind of a diverse model. I know that mix has changed for you over time as challenges have confronted the organization. Maybe you can speak a little bit to some of those challenges with managing that mix and how you've had to adapt.
So the single biggest challenge, and I think a lot of people will find this, really was COVID. And Uganda we have athletes who've got all sorts of world records, but the one world record which was probably not really very popular was 88 weeks of schools being closed. So we do send, so we own our own building, which really helps, so we don't really have to pay rent for that. That came out of a huge fundraising drive to buy a property in the center of Kampala for about $850,000. But it's ours. But then we also do send our teachers out to various different schools. But that period in COVID was when we went from serving between 450 and 500 students to 33, who were the only ones who could join in online. It grew to about 42 and remained there for about 6 months. So that created a challenge. But this was, of course, everybody understood it was a global thing. But then we just remained closed for ages and then reopened, and then we've slowly been building back up the numbers. Yeah, it continues to be something we continue to do.
Yeah, I don't appreciate that that happened, but I appreciate your point about it, because I think it is important that one of the risks with these models, and I'll come to Sheila in a second, she can sort of describe the Humentum model, is it can be a bit more volatile, right? Maybe you've got a grant program that's going to fund you for a year, or maybe sometimes multiple years. Maybe it's not. It has some challenges in terms of its execution. But it is important that when you shift to a model that's generated more by fee for service, you're much more subject to the fluctuations in the market. And then, of course, the market is impacted by externalities as well, such as COVID, right? So important to kind of go eyes wide open into a model that is a fee for service model, and recognize that you're now subjecting yourself to a little bit more ups and downs sometimes as revenues kind of move around. Sheila, do you want to take a couple minutes to talk about the Humentum model and maybe compare and contrast it to what we've heard already?
Okay. So for the Humentum model it's a hybrid also. So as Humentum, we do manage large donor-funded programs. So that comes from grant and the typical program management that goes into that. But also we do have earned income. And this is through a range of services that we offer organizations. And this could be consultancy services in different areas, being financial management, financial sustainability, risk compliance. So we do have a range of expertise where we go in and offer consultancy services. We do provide trainings at a fee, and this can be facilitated trainings, and also it can be self-paced training where organizations do get access to our on-demand kind of self-paced training at a fee also. Then we have a subscription model where organizations subscribe to be members of Humentum and get access to our solutions hub. And within this hub, they're able to get resources, they're able to get tools, and they're also able to get communities of practice for networking purposes. And so that becomes the areas in which we do get our earned income as Humentum. And as Chris says, there are two different perspectives. And even for sometimes for the large programs that we are managing, we do have large programs where we are offering these services, but part of a larger donor-funded program. So that's part of the Humentum model that we are running.
Right. So let's just pivot a little bit, because it's come up a couple of times. Actually, before we do that, I want to make one comment about real estate. So actually, next week, I'm running a different webinar, moderating a different webinar on sunsetting your organization. And the topic of real estate came up in that discussion as well. And for all of us organizations, like the decisions you make about how to manage your real estate, do have a significant impact on your model. So you heard Natasha, they have no real estate, no office, no nothing. At Humentum at this point, we don't either. Chigundu's in a kind of fortunate position that he had people who helped him supply his own building. So he's in control of his real estate, right? But often an organization that's dependent on like leases, especially multi-term leases, can be quite problematic in a case where you have like a lot of volatility in your revenue. So one of the key components when you're sort of thinking about this is saying, right, what is the kind of core infrastructure that I need to run this business? I mean, I don't think, Chigundu, you could do your business without that core physical asset. but it does come with challenges, right? And some of those challenges are related to how you think about your overhead costs. So I'd like to do a quick round robin with the three of you, talking about the role of overhead costs and how they play out in your model. I'm going to start first with you, Sheila, just in terms of kind of the overall risks and challenges in an earned income model with respect to overhead costs compared to in a donor funded model. And then I'll go back to Chigundu and Natasha to hear about it in their models.
Thanks, Chris, for that. One of the biggest challenges actually you find when a nonprofit wants to provide a fee-for-service model is being able to understand and appreciate and even allocate their true costs. And here, when I talk about true costs, it's especially the overhead costs. So you'll find that organizations will have a very good understanding of what it takes to actually run a program, but they don't have a clear picture of what what we call indirect or overhead costs are. And these are what we sometimes look at as invisible costs. So the cost of your HR, the cost of your finance, the cost of your IT, the cost of running your board and governance. So what are these costs? Because if they are not being tracked, if they are not being very visible, it becomes a problem later on when you're trying to do your fee for service. And you'll find that this challenge for nonprofits or grant-funded organizations not being able to have this understanding is because of the traditional ways in which donors have been funding organizations. So you find that there's this culture of really either tightly restricting your indirect costs or really not charging them fully because you want to look cheaper, or even the donor themselves, they just don't want to be able to get into that. And as a result, you have years and a very big culture of really underinvesting in your infrastructure. Now, if you go into a fee-for-service model and you carry the same mindset where you don't want to fully recover your costs, or you really don't understand your full costs, then you're going to have problems. Because what will happen is you're going to underprice your service, which will lead to under-resourcing, which will also lead to staff burnout, and the quality of your service will go down. And eventually you'll end up with a financial loss or an unsustainable margin. And this is because you're providing a service at a price where you've not done the proper cost accounting. You know, that you really don't understand what does it take for me to deliver this service. So the price you're giving it out on is not actually being able to meet your actual cost. So what I would encourage all organizations is that you cannot in any way subsidize services for a fee for service model. That mind shift has to change. You actually have to sit down and do a proper cost accounting, understand your direct costs, those visible costs for delivering that service, and also take time and look for tools and expertise to be able to understand what are these indirect costs that also are contributing to that service delivery, then put a margin on top so that you're not actually looking for diversification of income, but you're actually undergoing losses in the long term. So that's one of the things that we've actually seen, the cost recovery when you're now trying to go for a fee-for-service model.
Yeah, that's a great description, Sheila. And again, this is a multi-decade problem with how donors and funders have funded most of our organizations. And because of their practices, sometimes our own understanding of our costs are obscured. And it's really important when you shift to an earned income model that you unpack that, because probably you're competing in an earned income model with for-profit organizations. And believe us when we say that they know this. They understand all their costs. They're not confused by these weird funded models that donors are trying to keep your overhead costs low, et cetera. So you want to have that same mentality. You want to shift your mindset to running a business and make sure that you're understanding not only all of those costs, but what margin, what surplus do you want to make on top of that? So maybe we can come in, Chigundu, how do you think about it? How do you think about where your various cost structures, what have been the challenges for you in identifying this and setting the appropriate price and fees for your clients?
Yeah, it is tricky. Like Sheila mentioned, you want to price so you can cover all your overhead costs. But sometimes there are market drivers that mean that you cannot do that without pricing yourself out of the market. And then you ask yourself, you touched on it earlier, what is a social enterprise. And so Kampala Music School, I mean, we're looking at it, but one of our tagline is developing talent and changing lives. I'm just seeing how so many lives have been changed over the years. But at the same time, yes, we do have overheads, and I think we did work and do work together with Global Giving. So we do their accelerators. But it was only in COVID was the first time when they were talking about raising money to cover your overheads and encouraging organizations who are part of that crowdfunding to ask for that. And it was really the only time we've ever done that. Normally, we do ask people to sponsor children, and then we work towards having critical numbers which will cover our critical costs. So we know that if we're serving X number of students, then we cover all our overheads. So we tackle it by looking for volume. But at the same time, your overheads in this are things like your marketing person. You've got to become a good marketer who will go out there and get you students. And then, of course, you'd need a good accountant so that you can actually know what your overheads and what are. And also, again, to the whole thing of real estate, we were really fortunate. We got a really good building that was really well built. But even then, we're currently we've taken off part of the roof and putting it back on, and we were trying to do that in this season because we knew there's not going to be any rain, and then of course it's rained, and so there is all that. So there are hidden costs sometimes with owning a building. Sometimes it can be a liability, but because of the way in which it was, and again, the accountants in the room might be able to explain a little bit better, but we were fortunate to have enough money raised, and we're slowly depreciating it. It does hit the balance sheet, but then of course you release the revenue over time. So we decide how long the building is, and so how long the building will last, and so revenue is released through, I think, amortization over time. We have, of course, the same costs as other people. We've got legal costs, and then and of course, the biggest thing for us though is people, because we are really people based. So it's also covering the admin costs for the admin staff, and of course, fixed admin staff is always one of your biggest worries, because not to say it badly, but you have to pay National Security Social Fund for them, which is a 5% contribution from them, but 10% on top. And again, every time you hire somebody new, you have to think about that extra 10% that you're going to have to pay to do that. Yeah, I see a question in the chat, whether we actually make a surplus and have sufficient income to cover its overheads. That happened twice. But and that was just before COVID, which was one of the crazy things. We were really having a really good year, but sometimes we are not quite covering all our overheads, and we do survive really because people do pay cash ahead, and so that helps us sometimes chase our tail when that doesn't happen. So it's kind of how we've survived over time. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I want to call out a couple of things there. Then we'll come to Natasha, because with a much lighter model, maybe overheads looks different, and she's got some interesting things going on as well. The important thing I think I heard you say, Chigundu, is in some cases, you may be charging fees that are lower than your total cost, but you know that. You know what the total cost is. You calculated all those overheads. You know what all of those hidden costs are that you say, and you've tried to identify other sources to be able to cover those wherever possible, right? And so that kind of connects with what Sheila was saying, is that the first and most important thing is to understand your true costs. And I want to come back to a fuller description of Robert's question, but I think an advantage actually of an organization that's actually been working with USAID is if they, for example, had a NICRA, they've probably done a lot of work already on their true costs, right? If they were doing de minimis, it may be a little more complicated. It's organizations that are funded often by other funders where these kind of full costs are obscured. But I would say step one is make sure you understand your full cost profile. But I think there's some other strategies we can come back to, Robert, on your question. So Natasha, you have a much lighter model, but you are benefiting from some support for your overheads. And you mentioned at the beginning also you're doing some investments, and I think people would be interested to hear about some of what you're doing there. So can we come back to you on that?
Okay, I'll start with the last point first. On investments, yeah, we do our best, right? We try to invest with our primary bank, which is based in Botswana. We've done that. I think in our earlier call, I did indicate the frustration of how little we get out of it. I can give you a very specific example. We invested 40K with them, and it's a 1-year investment. You don't touch that money. You don't know what they're doing with it. And only in December, they will be like, hey, here's $800 on top of your 40K. So it is an investment. We did get some little something, but it wasn't impressive. So definitely it's a discussion I'm going to have with Umentum guys about how best to invest on top of what we're already doing. But we're also looking into potentially getting a property because somehow we were convinced that getting real estate is also a good way to just store money. But coming back to overheads and the situation with that, as a virtual team, we work from home, which is really nice, of course, with its own challenges, especially when you have a 1-year-old. But the sensitive nature of our work makes having a physical office highly risky for us, of course. So we do have quite minimal overheads. We are designed to be highly fluid, and we value the ability to expand and contract as needed. But our typical expenditures are on, for example, keeping our cloud and digital infrastructure alive. That is basically our website and email hosting. We have an online cloud storage. We pay for accounting packages, occasional changes of primary working devices of our core team. We do pay medical aid for our core team, and we have an emergency fund, again, because of the nature of the work. We have to keep a lump sum to be able to assist someone who gets in trouble while they're deployed on a mission. Our board is paid a nominal fee, but they are happy to starve along with us when we just don't have the funds. We don't even touch our reserves to pay them if we ever get to such a point. Most importantly, as I indicated, being virtual and consultants, my team is made up of multi-potentialites, people who do other things. For example, on my core team, I have a seamstress. You know, she's a powerful digital security trainer, but in her other life, she actually makes dresses for people. My co-founder, Tawanda, is a part-time lecturer at the Women's University. We also have an artist on the team. So the team itself is highly encouraged to explore other forms of personal income generation, because I'm not going to be answering any calls when their rent is due. The fact that everyone does other things simply means that if there's no work, there's no work. As I did indicate in the chat, there are some challenges with the model. I kind of spied a question regarding taxes. I don't know if you want me to already launch into that or hold on to it for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for keeping an eye on the chat. Yeah, if you can answer the question about your registration, if you feel comfortable. If you don't, that's fine. And then, yeah, if any insight you have about your particular tax situation, and then maybe Sheila, you can take the second part of that question, which is like, does this complicate things or does it actually simplify things? I'd like to come to you. And then we're gonna already, I can see the time. We're going to run out. I want Chigundu and Natasha also just be thinking in the back of your head. I'd like to come back to that issue you raised, Chigundu, which is like, once you move to these models, you have to go find your clients. And I'd like each of you to sort of talk about how you're doing that. But yeah, Natasha, let's just stick with you with a couple of these questions we have in chat.
So first of all, we were initially registered in Zimbabwe as Digital Society of Zimbabwe in 2015. And then we had to rebrand in 2020 after all the work we were doing is literally out of Zimbabwe. So we registered in multiple places. We have 3 registrations, one in South Africa and one in Botswana. And these registrations were necessitated because of banking requirements, basically. And also our Zim registration couldn't allow us to operate regionally. So right now, when we operate as a regional entity, it's our Botswana registration that takes precedence. And then the question on tax complications, absolutely. Whatever you are imagining, yes, we are dealing with it. It's ridiculous. Like, for instance, we have to hire, I'm based in Zimbabwe. I'm the CEO, which means when we hire auditors, we are doing it in the country where I'm at, where the bulk of my team is at. So our Zim auditors will be like, so tax compliance for the rest of your network. And I'm like, but they're based out of Zimbabwe, right? So this is a fight I fight every year because we're dealing with auditors who are using a playbook from 1970. It's a blueprint that refuses to acknowledge, let alone understand, modern working models. So they will raise a lot of headaches about ZIMRA, our local tax authority. But I'm like, someone who is in Malawi is supposed to pay ZIMRA how? So we have a clause in all our consultant contracts that stipulates they have to sign to say, I am going to be tax compliant in my country. I am responsible for my own taxes. But auditors with their 1970 blueprint refuse to work with that. So that's the major headache we face, among other problems. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Sheila, do you want to add anything about reporting or about tax or about compliance? You've been in that audit a little.
Okay, I'll just share some of the examples I've seen. Being very cognizant, I'm not very, I don't know all the tax regimes, and each might have their own nuances. But what I've seen some nonprofits do, actually they create like a trust where that trust owns the profit-making organization. So they kind of restructure the organization itself with the purpose of really doing a separation between the organization that does the program and grants, and then the organization that's actually running the for-profit. So you have the nonprofit is owning, maybe has a trust that owns the for-profit, and then they create different structures for the for-profit. I know one of the key things is that whatever profit you make, you have to actually pay, you have to do, the whole corporate tax profit and loss accounting. If you do get a profit, you have to pay a tax on it, but whatever remains, you cannot just go out there. Since it's a non-profit, the owner is a trust, which is a non-profit. It actually has to be plowed back into your work that you're doing for the non-profit. So those are some of the structures that I've seen happening. But what I usually advise is that at the point you make that decision, you actually have to bring in a tax and compliance expert, because they're able to restructure your organization in a way that you don't get into problems with the tax authorities. Because also in some countries, actually, if you're a nonprofit, they also do have restrictions on what service models you can give and what actually you can do with that profit that you get from the service model. So I always say, please get in touch with your tax compliance person. But predominantly, I've seen a lot of organizations restructuring to separate the two, where the for-profit is different from the non-profit, but the non-profit is structured in a way that it owns the for-profit. So whatever happens after tax is plowed back into the work that the non-profit is doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up those governance and structural issues, Sheila. So, I have that experience as well. I used to run a for-profit that was owned by a not-for-profit. And that was exactly our structure. It was in the US. So there's some unique things about its structure here in the US, but that was exactly the process. And it provided the for-profit entity much more flexibility and agility. And then we could take whatever income that we generated and fund that back up to the not-for-profit. So that is an interesting structure. There are probably unique considerations in each jurisdiction, but something obviously organizations can think about. I want to quickly respond a little bit again to Robert's question. I was actually talking with a leadership team of a USAID implementer earlier this year, kind of in the fallout of the funding disruptions. And they were doing something quite interesting, which is one of the first steps they did is they inventoried all of the different skills and capabilities and competencies that they had as an organization. And they were working, I think, in about 10 or 12 countries across Africa. They identified those, they inventoried those, and they identified which of those services could they now sell directly to other organizations as a service delivery model. So this was things like logistic support, vehicle maintenance, They were looking at meal and reporting. So they were identifying pieces where they could essentially turn themselves into a consultant or a service provider. And not all of their services were relevant to that. But that was kind of the first step, is kind of unbundling and unpackaging things that they had been used to sort of getting provided a grant or a cooperative agreement for, and breaking it down into the component parts and saying, well, we still have a lot of these capabilities. We could potentially be using these capabilities in the same countries we're operating in, with a whole new set of partners and clients. What they were running up against, though, is this question of like, right, how do we go to market? How do we find clients? And I think maybe that's the topic we can pivot to next as a way of maybe kind of closing the conversation. So maybe I can come back to you, Chigundu, which is like, what are some of the challenges, or what are some of the tools that you guys use to find clients? Because once you move to this earned income model, you're always in the market, you're always finding the next users of your services. So maybe we'll come to you and then Natasha.
It's so the music school opened in 2001, and for a long time we had a budget line for marketing that was never really used. And when I became ED, it was something that we changed up quite quickly. But initially what we did was to have a company to come look at what we were doing, and then we had a marketing executive who would be part of the team, would be an employee, would get a retainer, but then it was up to her to go out and get people, and then get paid over and above that, which really helped because she was motivated to do so, and she did a great job. She then left to go do a PhD in marketing, obviously, but the bug caught her because she came in not as initially a marketer. But then we've then since had somebody who was on a fixed salary, and that did not end well. So I think it just helps to have somebody who is the base cost is low, but is motivated by bringing people in. And then somebody asked a question, I think, about marketing and fundraising, and you find that the messaging is different for that, and the skill set is different. Somebody who is in resource mobilization, the language you're speaking to donors is very different from that person who's trying to sell fees for services, as we've been talking about that now. It's but then the marketing thing, I knew before stepping down, I knew, for instance, for every shilling I spent, I would earn 8. So knowing the overall marketing costs, I was able to know, and we always worked on that basis. And it was something which sometimes I struggled to explain to the board, and sometimes I did take decisions into my own hands, and just pushed to do that. But the board is always hesitant to spend money, but then they're always happy when it comes in. So so knowing that, I was able to know that if my overall budget is X, I need to spend an eighth of that on marketing. The whole thing, that was the salaries, radio adverts, social media, the works, basically, to do that. We found that in the years when we tried to save money on marketing, we also contracted in size. So it's something which we're doing, and I actually saw the new ED. She's in the room somewhere, but it's something we're working on with on her with, to try and get that pushed up a little bit. And to that, if I may just answer somebody who's asking about NSSF and salary caps, and again, it comes to when you're thinking, think of the total expenditure as one big thing, and looking at little things as well is important. But at times we can only afford the stuff we can afford, and it's meant sometimes that I've gotten people at interview level who are really, really good, and sadly have had to let them go and settle for the second best. But that has also meant that I have to spend a lot of time coaching and growing such people to be who I need them to be. And it's often worked out, not always, but yeah.
Yeah, two really important things I want to highlight there. One is, yes, a fundraising person is not a marketing and sales person for earned income, and vice versa. Like, you can't also take someone who's like done a lot of services, marketing or sales, and put them into a fundraising role. So it's very unique skills. So just know that as you move your things across. And the second thing is super important, what Chigundu said, which is we are trained in the nonprofit world to limit our fundraising costs. Like, people look at this and really look at that line and say, well, how much is this organization spending on fundraising, as if that's a bad thing. When you move into services marketing, it's totally different. You're going to need to continue to kind of invest to keep that engine going. And if you underinvest, you're going to pay the consequences in terms of your top line revenue. So you really have to shift your mindset related to that. And that is a whole other topic that I could take more time. Natasha, you're going to get the final word on how you're generating clients and raising visibility for your work. Meanwhile, Christine has put in some links for some services that Humentum can offer around financial sustainability and revenue diversification in case you're interested. And Natasha, will come to you, and then I'll close it out.
So, okay, due to the sensitive nature of the work, of course, DSA pretty much operates under the radar. So we do not do any marketing, and you will find that even our website is deliberately vague. We primarily get referrals through a snowball effect. So basically we help A, they will rave about it to B, and then B gets in touch with us. So a sort of word of mouth. Some stumble upon our website or our single social media account, which is on Twitter. However, most importantly, we are part of multiple cybersecurity networks that make referrals to each other. So that's the primary way we get clients. Back to you.
Yeah, that's great. And I think really important there, like, you don't have to be running adverts. You don't have to be putting up a billboard in the capital city to market your services. Referral networks sometimes are actually the most powerful way, because people trust people. So Natasha's team does a great job. That organization says, hey, I worked with these guys on a cybersecurity audit, and here's what they can do. And also related to referrals, I think another opportunity is think about building referral networks with organizations with complementary skills, right? So you're both, the profile of organization that you're funding, or an individual in Chigundu's case, is the same, but you're offering one service and this organization here is offering a different service. Can you cross refer to each other? So those are some of the strongest ways, especially if you're trying to just enter into this, because as Chigundu said, finding and hiring the right person as a full-time marketing executive, sometimes it's not always successful on the first go. I've learned that from experience as well. So if you can actually benefit and use some of the networks and relationships you already have to find clients, it gets you started. Chigundu, you off muted. Did you want to say one more thing?
Yeah, sorry, it was an accident, but I just want to say, yeah, we know in our marketing mix, at least until recently, that 55% of our clients are referrals. So it's one thing we've been working towards, and then 33% is digital media. It changed during COVID because I guess people were not seeing each other as much, but that's something that is really a big part of what we of our persons, yeah.
We're at the point where we get to thank everybody. So I first want to thank the panelists, Chigundu, Natasha, Sheila. Thank you for sharing your generous insights from your lived experience. And as one of the commenters mentioned in chat, yes, there are definitely pros and cons. There are challenges and there are opportunities here. And I know we could have talked longer today about all of those. I also want to thank everybody for your comments and questions in the chat. It always makes it a much more vibrant session. I love it as moderator when I can pull your suggestions in. Thank you, Christine, for keeping us going in the background. Fantastic moderation from your perspective and letting everybody in and out. And again, if you need some additional resources, we've put out a couple of links there for some of the training and consultancy that we offer. Sheila also recently posted a blog on this. You can find that on the Humentum website, and there's some free links and resources as part of that as well. I wish you all a good rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you are. And our next webinar is next week, July 23rd, same time, 2 p.m. UTC, and it's on sunsetting your NGO. So it's a very different end of the spectrum. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.